Welcome everybody to the New South Wales Health Statewide Biobank. It's a great pleasure to be introducing Dr. Robert Hewitt for our seminar today. And Robert is joining us from the United Kingdom, as I think you probably understood from all of our discussions about the coronation. So Robert's a medical doctor and he's been involved in biobanking for a very long time, and he's joining us today as the founder of the Biosample Hub, based in the UK, which is an organisation that seeks to connect industry users of biobanks with, quality, reputable biobanks all around the world to encourage the use of biospecimens in research. I think many biobankers who are here today will realise that underuse of biospecimens is a big issue within the community. And Robert's organisation, Biosample Hub, is attempting to, I think, increase that utilisation rate and increase the use of samples by industry researchers. Before I start, I also want to recognise that I'm joining you today from the Statewide Biobank, which is at Camperdown on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I want to pay my respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, their elders past, present and emerging, and welcome any Indigenous people that are joining us today. So we will be recording today's session. Please just stay on mute during the session, and then we'll hopefully have lots of time for some discussion. But thanks again very much for attending, and thank you, Robert. We're really looking forward to your talk. Robert, I think you're on mute.
See if I can. Is that okay now?
Yep, that's great.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Jenny, and it's a pleasure to be here, and especially talking to you in Sydney. Sydney has a very special place in my heart. My wife's family come from Sydney, and my youngest daughter is studying at Macquarie University at the moment. So good to be talking to you. And yes, you can see the title of the talk I want to give. And I just want to start by telling you a little bit about industry. Here we are. So the biotech and pharma industries need clinical samples, and they need the samples to identify and develop new drugs and diagnostics and vaccines. And if you're not working in industry, it may come across that industry is just one big homogeneous group of companies. And maybe that just the pharmaceutical industry is the main part of it, and everything else is an extra. I want to explain a bit more to you to show you that that absolutely is not the case. There are very diverse companies, and this table just shows some of the differences between big pharma, large biotechs and small biotechs, as far as some characteristics are concerned that really determine how well these companies are able to source biospecimens. Okay, so if you look at big pharma, you can see that their budgets are very large. They may have dedicated, or they generally have dedicated sample procurement staff, which make it a lot easier for them to find samples. Age-wise, they are mature, and so that means they've had lots of time to make contacts with hospitals and biobanks, and they also perform a lot of clinical trials, and that also gives them access to samples and to clinicians. So all of this makes it much easier for big pharma. To go to the other extreme, if you look at small biotechs, of which there are many, with a head count of 1 to 10 people, their budgets are obviously going to be very much smaller, They're unlikely to have sample procurement staff. Their company age is a lot younger, maybe just a few years. They may maybe startups may have only been in existence for a couple of years, and they're very unlikely to have, if they're small and young, unlikely to perform clinical trials. So there are big differences between these different types of company. Now, just to show you some information to illustrate this about big pharma companies, here you see a number of the largest big pharma companies in the world, and you can see that of this list, the headcount, the number of employees, is very high. And in this list, the smallest company has 30,000 employees. The age of these companies is also really quite surprising. The most recently founded of all of these companies is Novo Nordisk, founded in 1923. So, in other words, the youngest company here is 100 years old. Okay. Now, this is looking at biotech companies. Biotech companies in the diagnostics and therapeutics area. And this shows you in the USA the number of companies of these different sizes, number of companies in the 1 to 10 headcount range, 1 to 10 employees, you can see is the largest. So most of these companies are very small. When you look at the 11 to 50 headcount group, that's half the size, and so the trend continues. If you look at Europe, you see the same trend. Most of the companies are very small. Just to give you some idea how old these companies are, the mean age for this group in Europe is about 6 years. For the companies that are in the 200 to 500 headcount range, the mean age is 20 years. And the same trend is seen in Asia and Australasia. So most of the companies are in the 1 to 10 headcount range, and that falls to 50% in the 11 to 50 range. Okay. Now, just to give a little bit more background about the different types of biotech company that are relevant here. There are the therapeutics biotech companies that are trying to produce innovative therapeutic products. And so they're focusing on target identification and validation and drug discovery and development. And then there are the diagnostics companies, and they are aiming to produce medical diagnostic tests. So they're focusing on identification of biomarkers. Now, in addition to these two main types, there are also contract research organizations, and these organizations provide services to the biotech companies and also to the pharmaceutical companies. And some of these companies may, for example, be experts at setting up and running in vitro assays that may be involving the use of human tissue. Maybe they may be experts in producing organoids, for example. And so these contract research organizations are another important player in the whole ecosystem, and they are another group of biotechs that require biospecimens in order to do their work. Now, a study in 2018 in the UK found that biotech companies find it very difficult to access clinical samples. And so here they're talking about SMEs. So These are companies less than 250 employees. So these are the small companies and biotechs, and they're finding it very difficult to find samples in the UK. And you know, when you think of the information I presented to you about the characteristics of the companies of different size, I think it's not too surprising to imagine that they would find it difficult. And in fact, I think this is a worldwide phenomenon that small biotech companies find it difficult to find samples. So what are the sample procurement options for biotech companies? Well, the first option is to find a clinician or hospital biobank to provide the samples. You know, this is, of course, much easier if you're a large biotech, a large pharma company, or a large biotech that's been around for some years, or it has a large number of staff that can focus, you know, some of whom can focus on sample procurement. Much more difficult if you're a small, recently formed biotech. And then the other option is to choose a commercial biobank or a CRO to provide your samples. Well, that may be easier, but I think it's not ideal. I think the ideal, many people would agree, is that the biotech is in direct contact with the biobank so that they can communicate freely, and the biotech knows exactly where the samples are coming from and whether they can trust the source. When you're using a commercial broker, there are two main issues that you contend with, and the first is the traceability issue, because commercial brokers sit in the middle between the biotech and the biobank, and it's not in their business interests to put the two sides together, to put the biotech in contact with the biobank. And so as a result of this, the biotech and the biobank don't meet unless there is some kind of restrictive contract in place, which allows them to meet under certain conditions. So this traceability problem is really described very well in this article by Hoffman et al. And they emphasize the need for the source of the biospecimens to be known, and for there to be full information about the pre-analytical conditions in which samples were collected. So just in a nutshell, if sample origins are not known, then sample reliability is not known, and that's a problem. And it's a problem that's not acceptable in the field of diagnostics, in the field of drug discovery and development as well. But in the field of diagnostics, in Europe, there is a new regulation, the IVDR, which actually makes it much more important for biotech companies that are developing diagnostics to know the source of the samples that they use for developing their assays. And so this puts extra emphasis on the need to know the source of your sample. The other issues, as far as commercial brokers are concerned, are the legal and ethical issues. And in Europe, we have the Oviedo Convention, which is the major legal document regarding the commercialization of biobanking, and this prohibits financial gain. It states in this Article 21 that the human body and its parts shall not, as such, give rise to financial gain. That sounds very cut and dried. In fact, there is an explanatory note to that which says that it is acceptable to charge a reasonable cost recovery fee. But anyway, because of laws like this and because of social attitudes, commercial brokers find it difficult to operate in certain parts of the world, particularly Western Europe, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. Singapore has very strict rules, which I'll tell you about, and also South Korea and Japan. So in Singapore, there is the Human Biomedical Research Act of 2015, which tackles this subject. And they say that to minimize complications when obtaining human tissue from foreign sources, it is advisable to obtain human tissue from suppliers in countries that similarly prohibit commercial trading of human tissue, and it specifies, like Australia and New Zealand. And you can see here that the penalties for commercial trading in human tissue are very severe. Okay, so as mentioned before, I think the ideal scenario, I think many would agree, is that biotechs should be able to communicate directly with biobanks. So the reason I founded Biosample Hub was to provide a mechanism by which this could happen more easily. And so Biosample Hub is a not-for-profit organization. It has an online platform, and that online platform allows biotechs and biobanks to communicate with each other directly. And I'm going to show you some slides to just illustrate how Biosample Hub works, and tell you a little bit about Biosample Hub, and just then finish up on a specific topic that I'd like to emphasize. I'd like to leave you with. Okay, so Biosample Hub has three main pillars, and they are ethical, technical, and service. And the ethical component is that Biosample Hub is a not-for-profit company. It provides complete financial transparency, and this really removes a lot of concerns about unethical sale of human tissue, and biobanks in countries like France and Spain have been very happy to join Biosample Hub, whereas if we had been a commercial organization, they would have had very serious concerns and most likely would not have. So that's been helpful for making the platform work, apart from the fact that being not-for-profit is the right thing to do. Also the fact that biobanks and biotechs can communicate directly has ethical advantages, obviously, because the biobanks need to know who the end user of the sample is, because it's their responsibility to take care of the sample as the custodian of the sample. They have a responsibility to the patient, and also the biotechs know exactly where their samples are coming from. They know sample provenance. And then there's the technical component, and the technical component is that we've got three different directories available on the platform. They're a biobank directory, a biotech directory, and then a directory of requests which have been submitted by the biotech. And then there are networking features that allow different groups of people to communicate directly. So just to show you a few slides that illustrate how the platform works. This is a biobank directory. You can do a search on different disease strengths for the different biobanks, and you can see the different types of sample, the different information services, and so on that the biobank provides. And if a company using the platform wants to submit a request, they complete this form on the platform, and their request will then appear in the request directory, where it can be seen by the biobanks, and the biobanks can then respond by writing directly to the biotech. And in addition to this, we email out any new requests to the relevant biobanks as they come in. There are multiple ways in which biobanks and biotechs can find each other and get in contact with each other. It may be that a biobank wants to get in contact with a biotech because they know what kind of samples they're looking for, so they find them in the biotech directory and contact them directly there. Or it may be the other way around, the biotech contacting the biobank, or it may be the biobank responding to a specific request like this. And then in addition to this platform, we also have a service component. So in other words, that's customer service to make sure that things are proceeding in a satisfactory way with the requests. And to provide this service, we need to get feedback from both the biobanks and the biotechs. So we have systems for collecting feedback on a regular basis from biobanks and biotechs to follow what's happening with their requests, and so we can make suggestions if there are any difficulties, or help point the biotechs in the right direction. The business model for this company, because there has to be a business model, there has to be some income to sustain it. There's no fee for hospital biobanks, but there is a subscription fee for biotech companies, and that's a subscription fee for each 12 months. And transactions between the biotech company and the biobank take place independently of the platform. So material transfer agreements are simply exchanged between the biotech and the biobank, and the payment per sample is something that is completely independent of the platform. To show you the distribution of biobanks, you can see that there are biobanks on the platform from around the world, and this is a out-of-date slide. We've got a number of Western, like for example, the Western Australia DNA Biobank is now on the platform, and yeah, so we're close to 80 biobanks now worldwide, and a lot of them are in Western Europe. So I'm very pleased about that. You know, in parts of the world where there are concerns about the ethical aspects, there are particular concerns about the ethical aspects of trading human tissue, that these biobanks have been comfortable to join Biosample Hub. As far as the strengths of the biobanks on the platform is concerned, this slide just shows that there there are a wide range of strengths across the different disease types, and you can see the distribution strengths in the oncology area. And many of the biobanks provide services like DNA and RNA extraction and quality control, of cells or DNA or tissues, and so on. For various reasons, we've recognized some of the biobanks that have been most effective in supplying samples to biotechs on this platform. And there are two biobanks that really stand out, and I think it's interesting to look at these biobanks. One of them is CRBHCL, or the Biological Resource Center of Hospice Civil de Lyon in Lyon, France. And the other one that really stands out is the Indiana Biobank in Indiana, USA. So, you know, I think it's really interesting to look at the secrets of their success. Why is it that these two biobanks are so effective at providing samples to industry? And both biobanks have actually recently written an article, and that article hasn't. The articles have not been yet been posted on the website, but they will be shortly. But what I can tell you about the CRBHCL is that it's a very large biobank. It's composed of five biobanks that work closely together, with biobanks with different specialities. So, for example, there's one that specializes in neurological diseases, another that specializes in infectious diseases, another that specializes in solid tumors, and so on. And they're managed as far as the distribution of samples to external requesters. They're managed centrally, and they're highly motivated to provide samples to external researchers. So that tells you a little bit about one of the big success stories. The other, the Indiana Biobank, I think this is very interesting because this biobank specializes in fluid samples. So it concentrates on samples like blood and urine and sputum and so on. It doesn't get involved in the collection of solid tumor samples. And it manages to find samples for the most difficult and obscure conditions. To give you one example, we had a request for samples of a rare inherited genetic disease of eye disease called Stargardt disease, and Indiana Biobank managed to meet that request very effectively. We had another request for samples from patients with post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injury, and Indiana Biobank again was able to provide the blood samples necessary, or serum samples necessary for these requests. So those are two of our big success stories. Yes, Biosample Hub also supported some educational activities, and here you can see this is our YouTube channel. So if you seek out our YouTube channel, you'll find I think we've got over 20 presentations on that channel, and you can see we've got Michael Eppis there from Western Australia DNA Bank, and we've got Jenny, Professor Jenny Byrne from New South Wales. So yeah, and so I think that's been it's been educational. I must say I've learned a lot from it myself. So okay, so we've had that, and okay, one important question that comes up a lot after 3 years experience of running this this platform. What kind of samples do biotech companies request? What is there anything different about the kind of samples that biotech companies are requesting? And what I can tell you is that for sure, the number of requests that involve blood samples from cancer patients is very high. It's much more common to have a request for solid tumor samples and blood than it is to have a request for just solid tumor. And so obviously, I mean, that blood samples are going to be very important for biomarker studies, and that's something that I think if you're a biobank that's wanting to provide samples to industry, that's something to really take seriously. Another thing that really stands out is that there's a very big demand for fresh, viable tissue for organoid research and related studies where viable tissue is necessary. And so we're seeing a lot of requests like that. If you're interested in finding out more about Biosample Hub, that's the URL. Okay, so I just want to finish up by addressing what I think is a really important subject, and that is from the academic biobank perspective, what factors affect the level of interest in supporting industry, and especially the level of interest in supporting small biotechs, because these are the companies that have the most difficulty in finding biospecimens. And so academic biobank policies, access policies, biobanks are generally established to support their own institutions. So of course, biobank policies are going to reflect this. There's going to be an emphasis on looking after the founding institution, which is completely understandable. And biobank policies will reflect the attitudes of the higher management, but also biobank managers will be able to influence the biobank policies. So the biobank manager has to abide by the policies, of course. So what do the policies say about the sample distribution to biotech and pharma? That's the important question. And another question is, are the policies made public? And I know that that Dan has written about this and has brought out some very important points about policies being made public and the importance of that. So the motivation to supply industry. What's the incentive for an academic biobank to provide samples to industry? And well, I can think of 4 incentives, but maybe you can think of more, and I'd love to hear about them. But of course, demonstrating productivity is very important. Avoiding the underutilization of samples. Financial benefits to allow biobanks to recover costs. That's an important incentive. But lastly, there's social responsibility, and that's really something to think about. that's something that perhaps we should think about more, because we need to nurture small, innovative biotechs. These biotechs are our best hope of finding cures for incurable diseases. And really, these small companies should not be struggling to find any biospecimens at all. And I'm sure you agree with me that they deserve to be provided with the best, most reliable bioresources. So there's a problem as far as biotechs, small biotechs in the UK are concerned. There's a problem worldwide that these biotechs, these small companies, are having great difficulty finding reliable biospecimens. Finding any biospecimens is hard for them, but finding reliable biospecimens is extra hard. And so this is something that really requires attention. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll finish here, and very happy to answer any questions or discuss any issues anybody would like to raise. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. That was really great. Very interesting to learn about, I think, particularly the landscape of biotech companies. You know, it's often something that, for example, you know, I could say that it was news to me that there are so many of these small biotech companies because they're often a little bit invisible. And in that sense, you know, they're not unlike biobanks, where people think that there are many small biobanks too that are relatively poorly visible. We tend to focus on the very large, very visible organisations, but forget that they're just,
Absolutely,
you know, yeah, they're not representative, you know.
Yeah.
So that's very an interesting thought. I'm sure, yes, Dan, I was hoping you were going to put up your hand. You've done it. Thank you.
I'm just okay. Hello, Robert. It's good to see you again. And thank you for your talk. And I just want to bring back to the idea that you're talking about performance and the two banks that were performing the best according to your current metrics, which is fine in terms of giving samples out. But this whole question of effectiveness, and I think of, and this sort of raises another problem that we have just an example that we have given samples to, we were asked by a small biotech to give some samples to them. We duly gave them some samples, went through the whole process and gave them some samples. But we found that due to the market and the financial pressures and so on that the particular company was under, the particular project that we went to support was gazumped, and they cancelled it. So we gave them a whole bunch of samples, but nothing ever came of it.
Right.
So whilst I thought we were being quite effective in supporting small industry in that particular case, it ended up being a waste of samples. How can your system guarantee that when we give samples or when we engage with industry that they're actually going to be used? Because surely use of samples and generation of knowledge is a far greater measure of effectiveness than just samples being handed over at a greater rate. So I was wondering if you might want to comment about that.
Right. As far as performance is concerned, on the website, of course, it's very difficult to give biotechs or biobanks any kind of Trustpilot rating. That would not go down well. But what we have done as far as the performance of the biobanks is concerned is to start encouraging, motivating biobanks by things like stating, which are the most engaged biobanks on the platform, or which are have like the two biobanks I mentioned, which are the top performing biobanks. As far as the biotech companies are concerned, that's really much more difficult to assess because they have confidentiality issues. They don't like to give away a lot of information about what they're doing. And I can tell you that getting feedback from both sides, from biobanks and biotech, is very difficult. We have a feedback form on the website. In fact, I can show it to you if I've got time, but let's see. But basically, the feedback form lists every single request, and it's presented every time people come to the website, whether they're a biobank or a biotech, and they are asked to give the latest feedback on what is happening with that request. So it's very difficult to get feedback in a nutshell, but we are trying very hard. And I think to provide feedback on what the biobanks are doing is a lot easier than to provide feedback on what the biotechs are doing because of the confidentiality issues. But I mean, if a biotech was generating a lot of complaints, then obviously we would not want them to renew their subscription. I think that's about as much as I can say on that.
Yeah, the main thing is that confidentiality. Where you can understand why a biotech company wants to hold their cards close to their chest, but it's when they decision is made and projects are shelved that you've supported.
Yes.
That is disappointing because you go to a lot of effort to get samples. I mean, these samples are precious samples and
Yeah.
and you want them to be used. I mean, I don't think we should not want them to be used, but and it's very hard to tell. But I suppose it's the same as when you give a sample to what might be a really, really good project in the academic sense, but it for one reason or another it falls down, it doesn't work, the hypothesis isn't proven or whatever. So again, it's that risk you take in trying to choose where's the best place to put samples so that they're going to give you the best benefit in terms of knowledge gain. So it's hard to tell. So anyway, thank you very much for your answer. Thank you it's good hearing from you again. So
thanks, Dan. Yeah, and I must say that biobanks can certainly provide their feedback on request, and they're encouraged to it. But so far, we haven't had anybody reporting a similar thing to what you've experienced. I'm glad to say, yeah.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks. We've got a couple of other comments in the chat. See, Sarah's asked for a link, Dan, to your publications. So maybe I think she's found your biohoarding publication.
Biohoarding, that was the one I was thinking.
That's the one, yes.
Was that it?
Yeah,
that's the one.
I thought it might be.
Yeah.
That's the only one. So feel free to use that word.
Yes,
so,
biohoarding. It's a good word, but a bad thing, but a good term for what it is.
Exactly.
We've got a question from Sonia Yip. Sonia's asking about a sense of the size of the requests from biotech. So just in general terms, numbers of patients, samples, time points, that sort of thing. Can you give us a feel for what that looks like?
Well, generally speaking, I wouldn't. The number of samples requested. Generally speaking, even if the biotech is aiming for a very large number of samples, they will still accept smaller numbers from multiple providers. So generally speaking, if they are asking for hundreds of samples, they will say that they will accept a smaller number. I don't think that sample number has been a major problem for any biobank. Some I mentioned the types of samples that are most, that are frequently requested, like the blood samples from solid tumours, from patients with solid tumours, or the viable tissue samples. They are, of course, that's difficult for many biobanks, but it's certainly that is what's being requested. Some requests are, of course, a lot more difficult than others, but there's there's a wide range of different types, and yeah, well, I think we get some requests that most biobanks could fulfill quite easily, but then there are others that are much more difficult, maybe requiring samples from patients that are on a specific treatment, or maybe samples from patients that are taken at specific times during their treatment, can be very difficult.
But I guess what those biobanks could potentially do is like partner with biotech for prospective collection, because some of those specific things you just think there's just no way on earth that those samples are going to be sitting around, but they could work with the biotech to collect them.
Yeah, absolutely. So some kind of collaboration is often required for those more difficult requests. But yes, a lot of course, when I mentioned fresh tissue samples, of course, prospective collection is very important.
Yeah. Got a couple of other questions. We've got one from Albert, who's asking about level of trust between academic biobanks and commercial companies, and I guess level of trust in both directions. Can you sort of comment on your experience about, establishing that trust, or, it is a big issue, isn't it, trust, and it's a hard thing to measure.
Absolutely, trust in both directions. We have a biotech directory, which is something I've not seen elsewhere, and the biotech directory, the idea of that really is to provide the biobank with some information about where the samples are going to give them a feel for what that organization is, so I think that's helpful. I would say that probably about 1 in 5 biotechs, or 1 in 10 biotechs doesn't want to be on the biotech directory, but most of them are happy to be there and to give some brief details about what work they're involved in. As far as trust in the other direction is concerned, one thing that was quite interesting, a study carried out in Spain by CNIO found that biotechs in Spain felt that there was a lack of transparency shown by academic biobanks as far as the costing of their samples was concerned. And that, interestingly, resulted in a response from the biobanks, and in that there are many examples of biobank tariffs available on the web from Spain now. So they've become much more open about how much they charge for particular sample types. And so on our platform, we've got, I think, a total of about 18 examples of biobank tariffs, and 5 of them come from Spain. So there are trust issues in both directions, but I haven't encountered major problems myself with that. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. We've got another question from Sarah who's asking about biotechs being open to collaboration, and I guess we sort of touched on that a little bit. She's saying that the governance structure of the biobank that she manages limits providing samples to collaborative projects, and there can be hesitations from the Access Committee about providing to biotech.
Okay, well, certainly many biotechs are open to collaboration. So it's variable, but certainly many are open to collaboration. I can say that.
Do you have the feeling that in terms of, like you were talking about the biobanks that were successful biobanks, and clearly it sounds like some of these biobanks are quite large, they've got quite a lot of things to offer, but do you have a feeling, I guess this is coming back to trust, whether biobanks can do more in terms of making their websites more transparent in terms of how they work, what they offer? Do you think that that's an issue in terms of, like, can we work harder in that sense?
Right.
Can we do better?
Yeah, I think so, absolutely. Now, one thing I would say is that the biobanks, one message that's come across clearly is that biobanks need to be very clear themselves on what uses are permitted for their samples. And it's not just a case of what it says in the consent form. It also depends on what's going to go into the material transfer agreement about how the samples can be used. And so on each biobank profile on our platform, we asked the biobank to say, how can the samples be used? Can they be used? Can they only be used for research, by in-house research by the biotech company that they're being provided for, or can they be used for that biotech company to provide a commercial service to other biotechs, or can they be incorporated into a product? Like perhaps a tissue microarray, for example, that biotech company is going to sell to another biotech company. So those are different sort of categories of use, which are very important to the biotech company to know. And very often biobanks don't know when asked what the possible uses are, and you know, maybe it's only through the experience of working with industry that they actually find out what's going to go into the material transfer agreement. But that's really important information to have and to have available. How can the samples be used? And then also, I mean, you know, there's the importance of telling people, you know, who the biobank will and won't work with, you know, as far as the, you know, the biobank policy is concerned, that should be publicly available and clear, so that people don't waste time, so the biotech companies don't waste time contacting biobanks that are just not going to be able to work with them.
Not going to help, yeah. No, yeah. I think that's such important points, and we probably don't think about this or discuss this enough, you know, because I think biobanks are so sort of geared towards academic collaborations where the use of the samples is pretty clear. The samples are probably going to go to a lab, they're going to be used in that lab for certain things, and whereas with, yeah, well, what you're describing, the possibilities are much more varied, you know, in terms of working with industry.
Yes, yes.
We've got a few more minutes. Does anyone have a last question? Very welcome to jump in. Otherwise, Robert, that was a fantastic talk. It's been recorded. It's going to be posted on our website, and I think it's going to be a fantastic resource for many biobanks that are thinking about working with industry, that would like to work with industry. I think you've answered a lot of our questions. It's also fantastic to hear about the Biosample Hub and the principles upon which it's based. It sounds like a very much needed resource for biobanks and industry, and we certainly wish you all the best with its continued success, and look forward perhaps to hearing from you in the future about this. But thank you very much. Thanks to everyone for joining.
Okay, pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.